This is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. And I'm checking right now to make sure that we are streaming on YouTube. And we are. So, as you know, earlier this week, we had a problem with that. And we corrected it by the next day, which was yesterday, but I'm still keeping an eye on it. And I want to say hello to Janet in the chat room. It's good to see you. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments on whatever platform you're watching on. They should show up here in my chat room and we can talk directly. And that's one of the things I particularly like about this broadcast. Today, my subject is going to continue the discussion of leadership that we have been having. And hello to Black Crystal in the chat room. It's good to see you. Here in Danville, today is just beautiful. I am so pleased. The weather today is, it's 74 degrees, considering it was over 100 in just a few days ago. It's a lovely change. I know it won't last forever, but I'm quite enjoying it. And hello to Gwenny, hello to Nikki in the chat room. It's good to see you both. Yesterday we were doing mini readings, and I enjoy doing mini readings. They're a lovely way to connect with people. If you are looking for a mini reading, tonight is Tarot Thursday on Divination TV, and they do a full hour of mini readings for everyone they have time for. And so if you're not already taking advantage of Tarot Thursdays, please consider tuning in this evening. You'll enjoy it. Whatever platform you're watching this on, I believe Tarot Thursday will also be on. And where to go next is always the question. Maybe it's a subject in itself. It is, in fact, always the question. And the one place you can never go is nowhere. Even at the end of your life, at least according to the beliefs I follow, your soul still goes forward. It is not an ending. And so there's never a point where you reach an ending. You may reach plateaus. You don't reach an ending. The journey always goes forward. You know, I've run into so many people who say, oh, I hope I never reincarnate in this world. Well, you will. And even if you don't, it won't be the end. If you don't like the pace you're moving at, my advice is to talk to Spirit and say, you know, things are moving too fast for me. Can we slow them down? I found that Spirit listens. And I found that when you have that feeling that everything is just too difficult, part of what's happening is you're fighting the lessons that are there for you. Now, what does this have to do with leadership? Well, it has a lot to do with leadership. Because you may think, whether in everyday life or in a specific position, that if you get everything into such and such a position, everything will be perfect. No, that is not how life works. Things may be better, they should be better. Hopefully that's what you're working for. But perfect they will never be. If by perfect you mean an ideal situation that never changes, we don't get that in this life. So, whether we're talking about leadership in terms of an office or a position, or just how you live your life, you have to remember that there's always a next thing. You never come to the point that there's nothing. Now, you may come to the point that you make a vast change and little is the same, maybe nothing is the same. That can happen, but there'll still be a next thing. It just will be something different. And this is very important to remember because, some people think that if they can accomplish such and such, they'll be on a plateau they can remain on forever and never have to do anything else. Or their group or their community will be on a platform, on a plateau where, or sometimes a platform, where they can remain the same forever. And hello to Ed the Pagan in the chat room, and hello to Mary Hawk in the chat room. And, it's never that way. No matter how successful you are in achieving the goals that you have set, once you've achieved them, there's going to be something else that you need to do. There always will be. Sometimes it's going to be very obvious, sometimes it's not. But you must not assume that there's a point where you can just sit on your laurels and rest. Um, that's an important part of leadership. It's not what I plan to talk about today, but I thought it was important to comment on since we kind of happened on that subject. What I actually intended to talk about today is knowing your resources. But I guess first we need to talk about knowing your playing field. And the first thing to understand is that it's always an active field. If you don't have something big to do next, someone else will. And there's nothing wrong with someone else doing it. But there will always be activity. And you may come to that point in life where your next big thing is to be a cheerleader for other people. That's perfectly fine. But that's still your next thing. You may come to the point in life that your next thing is pursuing a less active lifestyle, owing to retirement or what have you. But that's still a next thing. As long as you're living, there will always be a next thing. And you must not forget that it is always about movement and hopefully movement forward. Ideally, you reach your plateau, you rest for a little bit, and then you continue up the hill. Sometimes you really feel that you're going up the hill. Other times, not as much. But whether you feel it or not, you are. And even when you're on that plateau, things are going to be moving under your feet. And, it may be, and hello to Stephen in the chat room, it may be that you come from a background that taught you something else about how life is supposed to be. But if so, they taught you badly. Life is never static. And neither, for that matter, is the spirit world. I spoke at some length about happiness in earlier videos, and one of the things I pointed out is that one of the big problems that we have in our society is people misunderstanding what happiness is and mistaking a process for an action, for want of a better way to put it, mistaking something that is an ongoing situation for a single thing that can be accomplished. Happiness really is a state of mind and a matter of how you look at wherever you're at. This is partly true also of things like leadership and success. How you look at your situations has everything to do with what you can make of them. And you must never mistake them for being static. I often talk about a novel I read when I was a teenager because I was a big Battlestar Galactica fan back in the 1970s. And one of the books I read was the dramatization of that original Battlestar Galactica movie, which both as a movie and as a novel were not so great, really. But for a teenager, they were lovely. And they did have some very cool ideas in them. But one of the things in that novel that has always stuck with me is that there was a paragraph where the character of Commander Adama is talking about this place they have found themselves that people are perceiving as a paradise because they can have everything they want. And he says this just doesn't feel right to him because life isn't that way. There has to be a catch here somewhere. And he talks about how people so often think about perfection as being just having everything they want. But, if we consider the created world to be a reflection of the powers that create it, that really is not there as a goal of existence. Rather, it's growth, it's expansion internally and externally, it's deeper understanding, but it's not getting everything you want. I'm hard pressed to think of any situation where we commonly do. Human, non human, etc. There's always a path to growth, and that is always the path we need to be following. When we talk about knowing our playing field, we have to remember it is always in movement. The people around us are always in movement. And by the way, I'm a great believer in the famous saying that people will tell you who they are, and you should listen to them. As a younger man, and to some extent even still, I had a horrible vice, um, which I was taught by my mother, by Lady Crystal, by my grandmother, by my whole family, because we had always thought of it as a virtue. But I've learned that this is one thing that I cannot quite be in total agreement with, and that is to always um, extend the benefit of a doubt. What I've learned is, once may be an accident, twice might be a coincidence, the third time is definitely intentional. Um, there's a point beyond which you must not continue to give that doubt. And my advice to people who want to be leaders is do bear in mind that not everyone's going to help you. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not even necessarily intentional, but you must be aware of it. There are people out there who are wonderful people. They're nice to visit with. They're pleasant. They will destroy every chance they're given. They will use up your resources if you try to help them and never solve their problems because they're using their problems to structure their life. I don't bring judgment to that, but I do say don't interact with it too strongly or you're just going to be expending your resources for nothing. Now, I don't mean by that, don't try to help people, but do pay attention to what they do with the help. This is important for leadership, and especially if you're in a position of leading an organization, it's not only your resources we're talking about. So watch for those people who are suffering from constant problems that never get any better. Now, sometimes they have other virtues that make up for that. So it's not a black and white area, but you need to be mindful of those things that cannot be improved after attempting to improve them. I'm reminded of a particular story, and I don't know if Renee is with us today, but she'll recognize this story if she is. Did we say hello to Renee already? I don't think we've seen Renee yet today. But there was a particular man who was a very nice little man, always short of money, in fact, usually without money. And I had a friend who was regularly buying coffee for him at pagan events because he never had enough money for a cup of coffee. Very kind act. And this person did this until one day the man came in talking about the science fiction convention he had recently gone to and all the cool stuff he had bought, the hundreds of dollars of things he had bought. And a little bit of research showed that the ticket to that convention was $300. What this showed was not that he didn't have enough money for his cup of coffee, but that that was not his priority. Nothing wrong with that, but no reason that it should be my friend's priority either. She had thought he literally had no money. He did. And after that, she did not buy his coffee any longer. This is a thing to bear in mind. There's a famous author who tells a similar story. She had been at a pagan festival, and someone came up to her with a sob story. I'll go ahead and call it a sob story about how she really wished she could buy her next book, but she just didn't have the money, and she was her biggest fan on earth, and blah, 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 blah. And eventually, the author gave her the book. And hello to Kat Jones, Westover Squires, in the chat room. It's good to see you, Kat. So the author gave her the book. Within a few days, something happened. The author had seen a beautiful athame for sale at this same festival, several $100s. She could not afford this athame, but she really wished she had been able to get it. She noticed the same person who could not afford her $20 book buying this several $100 athame. She said it was the last time she ever gave away a free book. Because, of course, the book was not free to her. Because if you don't know, just because you're the author of the book does not mean that you get copies of it for free. You might get a discount. But yeah, if you see an author selling copies of their book at a festival or elsewhere, they paid for those copies. They just may have not paid the cover price. They don't get them for free. I don't get my own books for free. There is always a cost to those books. So when she gave her the book, she was effectively giving her money. And to see later that she could afford what the author herself could not was very galling. This is a problem in our community in terms of where people set their priorities. And I will tell you, getting back to that issue of knowing your playing field, there are some problems in the pagan community, and one of them is that by and large, this community has real problems setting its priorities, telling what's really important versus what's not. If you look at the history of the identity wars and witch wars in general, you can see that very easily. You can see people fighting over totally unimportant things while ignoring other more important things. You'll see it in many other places as well. Now, this is not a uniquely pagan thing. It's kind of a human thing. And part of that may have to do with a feeling of not being able to affect the more important things. But still, it's not a good thing. When you see arguments in our community, you'll often find they're arguing over irrelevancies, not over the things that actually affect anyone. One of the things I've heard so often in this community is we love spirited debate. We need a lot less spirited debate in this community. It's not a virtue. It's only a divisor. We need a little bit more consideration, a little bit more diplomacy in our community, and a little bit less debate over nonsense. Does that mean we shouldn't discuss things? Does that mean we should not discuss important issues? Of course we should. But there's a vast difference between a discussion and a debate. A debate is set up for one partner or one party to be a victor and the other to be a loser. You cannot have both parties emerge victorious as a rule in a debate. That's not the intent. You can in a discussion. That's why so often we debate ourselves into a pile of ashes. We need to learn how to interact as adults. And only some of our people have mastered that skill. Hello to April in the chat room. It's good to see you, April. Part of this has to do, and hello to Renee in the chat room. It's good to see you, Renee. Part of this has to do with example. This is actually the very first thing I thought I was going to discuss today, because I was looking, I was looking, as I'm commonly doing, at the rise of Christian nationalism. and their desire to affect particularly the educational system, which is absolutely vital to their plans. Why? Because if you influence a person while they're a small child, it's going to be very hard to ever change that influence. And part of the reason for that is that people learn from their earliest examples. I was thinking earlier, you can't expect people to show compassion if they've never seen an example of compassion. You can't expect people to be reasonable if they've never actually seen an example of reasonableness. You can't expect people to be organized if they've never seen organization. And hello to Arlene in the chat room. Apparently some people may have had some trouble getting in today. I don't know why that is, but we are live streaming on YouTube. That I know. It's necessary to see the examples to be able to imitate them. And if you want to prevent certain behaviors, you stop people from seeing the examples of those behaviors early on. But that's one of the things we need to be very mindful of. And so one of our questions, in my opinion, is where do we make sure those examples are still available to people? But when we look at our own community, when I talk about organization, you cannot expect people to be able to organize if they've never seen an example of organization. If their only examples of organization are somehow negative, of course they're not going to understand the positive aspects of it. And how do you change that? The only possible way is by giving them examples of positive organization, and that doesn't always work. But I don't know how else to do it. Spoke about putting priorities in a good order so that what's truly important is the strongest priority. But if people have never seen someone do that, how do they learn to do it? Well, the answer is they don't. It's a matter of critical thinking skills. If you look at a number of issues and ask yourself which is the most important, do you have the skill to answer it? If you disagree with someone over theology, if you disagree with someone over economics, if you disagree with someone over racism, if you disagree with someone over fascism, which of these is a stronger priority than others? I'm not saying that several of them are not strong priorities, maybe all of them, but that's something a person must figure out. But if your answer to that question is um, you're disagreeing over which direction to start the casting of your circle in, you have missed the point. If you're disagreeing in over whose lineage is better, you deserve what you're going to get, to be blunt. Because other people in this world are putting their priorities in very practical systems of order. And if we're not able to do the same, certain things will happen. And we just need to be mindful that these things are there. And I've been watching the last few days people arguing, oh no, this isn't real, you're imagining it. Yeah. If you can look at the last 20 years in the United States and think the kind of things that are being talked about are imagination, either you are in full-on dementia and don't remember where we were 20 years ago versus where we are now, or you're an idiot, one or the other. There is no middle ground, in my opinion. That you may disagree over exactly The details of the situation, that's another question. But if you don't realize that there has been a serious step backward, you're an idiot. Um, and I think it's kind of time to be aware of that. And there's nothing wrong with idiots. The world is full of them. To paraphrase a common saying, the gods love idiots, or they wouldn't have made so many of them. But you don't want them running everything. And the nice thing about someone, let's say, being an idiot, is they don't have to stay that way. They can learn if they're willing. They can look at their situation, look at the priorities, look at what's happening, and make a better decision. Or they may not. And I think sometimes the reason people choose not to. Oh, and Mary says she can't hear me. Is anyone else having that problem? Um, I have no way to check that while I'm on the air. Um, but if anyone else is having that problem, please let me know. If you're not having that problem, please let me know that we have about 1 minute left. But so for my final message, I want to say, I'm maybe being a little more blunt than I have historically been, because my position is a different one than it has historically been. As I said earlier, we need. Oh, April says she can hear me and Steve can hear me. So, Mary, it might be something on your computer, or maybe one of the different platforms is having trouble and the others are not. We go out on so many platforms, even though I've narrowed the platforms for this program. There are a lot of them. Oh, and Mary says yes, it was on her end. Um, and maybe I should talk about that in an upcoming program, using all these different platforms, what the benefits are and what the challenges are. Because everything I've talked about today kind of ties into that, particularly um, making decisions based on priorities. And as I was saying earlier, I do believe we need more diplomacy, despite the fact that I myself am being maybe a little less diplomatic. And that's frustration. But I'm seeing people making the same mistakes I've watched them making for 50 years, and others who are not. But the ones who are, I just have kind of run out of patience with. Did you not hear yourself say this 20 years ago? Did you not hear yourself say it 40 years ago? Did you not notice what happened? And of course, it's not the same people, it's other people doing the same thing. But I guess it's human nature. But one of the things that I'm hoping to do here is to encourage people not to repeat the same mistakes. As I was saying yesterday, I think it was, yeah, as I was saying, well, Tuesday, we all make mistakes. We all have failures, and there's nothing wrong with it. That's how you learn. But if you make the same mistake 20 times, you're not learning. You need to actually learn from the mistakes and apply it. And while we're talking about idiots, let me tell you, I have been an idiot on many occasions. So in criticizing the idiots of the world, I am in part criticizing myself. I even earlier in this program pointed out one of the times I have been an idiot many times, and that is being too tolerant of what I should have recognized as bad behavior. And I certainly don't want to encourage the opposite of that. But, I think the 3-time rule is a pretty good one to judge by. Um, First time might be a mistake, second time is a coincidence, third time you got a problem. And this is much more in the forefront of my mind for the last few years, actually. And I think I'm going to end there today uh, with the following summing up: that you need to understand the ground you're on. You need to understand what you're bringing to it, but that'll have to be another program. You need to understand the deficiencies of whatever circumstance you're working with. And you can regret them, you can condemn them, but you also have to be very much aware of them. And ideally, you find ways to correct them. Which is not to say you can't shake your head at them. So with that, we've finished our program. I hope you've enjoyed it. Let us close with our prayer as we always do. Tomorrow I'll be back with the weekly roundup. And we're going to talk about among other things, voodoo and Walt Disney. That should be fun. So, Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives. We rejoice in your presence in our lives, and we pray that we shall go forward together hand in hand for many years to come. And we know this shall be so, but we ask you to help us to remember it. And we ask you to help us to learn the lessons that are presented to us in life, and to also see the strengths we are working with and the weaknesses we are working with, and how best to make the best of these situations. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great thanks and love. Knowing you're always with us from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always. And may you be blessed now and always. I thank you for your presence, and I will see you tomorrow.